Emma had never imagined that one summer could change everything. It began simply, almost quietly, when her father told her that his old friend Daniel was coming to stay at the lake house for a few months. Her dad was traveling overseas for work, and he didn't want her to be alone in that big wooden house by the water. She had smiled and agreed, not thinking much of it. Daniel had been part of her childhood, a friendly face who brought her gifts on birthdays and teased her about her missing front teeth when she was little. To her, he had always been Uncle Dan, the calm, dependable man who fixed the boat and told stories about faraway places. But that was years ago. When Daniel arrived, he wasn't the same man she remembered. He looked older, but in a way that made him seem stronger, steadier. His dark hair had turned silver at the edges, and faint lines marked his face. But his eyes still carried that warm kindness she used to trust. He smiled when he saw her standing by the porch and said, "You've grown up, Emma." Your dad wasn't kidding. She laughed awkwardly, brushing her hair back. "And you look different, but in a good way." The first few days passed easily. Emma worked from home, writing for a small design company, while Daniel spent his mornings fixing things around the property, the porch railing. The old dock, the flickering kitchen light, her dad never managed to repair. In the evenings, they cooked together, played soft music, and sometimes sat outside watching the sunset ripple over the lake. It felt peaceful, like something out of another life. A life without noise or deadlines or heartbreak. Emma hadn't told her father much about her breakup earlier that year. After 4 years together, her boyfriend had decided he wasn't ready for something serious. She told everyone she was fine. But inside she felt empty, like she had lost not only love, but a part of herself. Daniel didn't ask about it directly, but he seemed to sense it. He didn't push. He just listened. He noticed the quiet moments when she would stare at the lake too long or when she'd lose focus while cooking. Instead of giving advice, he would simply say, "You'll be okay. You just need time." It was that simple kindness that began to draw her in. Daniel didn't try to fix her. He just made space for her pain. One night, as they sat outside with mugs of tea, Emma asked about his life. "So, you never married?" He smiled faintly, staring at the reflection of the moon on the water. "I almost did once. But life had other plans. I think I got too caught up in work and traveling. One day I realized I'd built a comfortable life, just not one I could share with anyone." She studied him, wondering how someone like him could end up alone. He had that quiet confidence, the kind that made people feel safe. "You don't seem lonely," she said. He glanced at her. "Sometimes we get good at hiding it." Their eyes met, and something in her chest shifted. She quickly looked away, embarrassed by the warmth rising in her face. The next day, Emma went for a walk to clear her thoughts. She told herself she was imagining things, that she was reading too much into small moments. But as the days passed, those small moments multiplied. The way Daniel looked at her when she laughed. The way he brushed past her in the kitchen and immediately apologized, his voice lower than usual. The way silence felt heavier when they were alone together. It wasn't that anything wrong had happened. It was that everything ordinary suddenly carried meaning. One afternoon, a storm rolled in from the north. The sky turned gray, and the sound of thunder echoed across the lake. Daniel helped her bring in the outdoor furniture before the rain began to pour. They ran back inside, soaked and laughing. She handed him a towel, their fingers brushing for just a second, but it felt longer. He smiled, a little breathless. "You still hate the rain?" "Not anymore," she said softly. They sat by the window as the rain came down, talking about little things, childhood memories, favorite movies, her father's old jokes. But beneath their laughter, both of them felt something unspoken. It was there in the pauses, in the looks that lasted too long. That night, after the rain stopped, Emma couldn't sleep. She went out to the porch, wrapped in a blanket. Daniel was already there, sitting in the dark with a cup of coffee. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked without looking at her. She shook her head. "Too many thoughts." He chuckled quietly. "That's what happens near water. It brings things up you didn't know you'd buried." She smiled. "Like what?" He turned toward her, his eyes soft but serious. "Like feelings you thought you'd outgrown." The silence that followed was full, not awkward, not uncomfortable, just charged with things neither dared to say. Emma's heart beat faster. She didn't know if it was fear or something else entirely. She wanted to ask him what he meant, but she didn't. Instead, she just sat there beside him until the night faded into dawn. Over the next few days, the air between them changed. She tried to ignore it, tried to tell herself she was being foolish. But there were moments when she caught him watching her, not with judgment or desire, but with a kind of quiet longing, like someone who knew he shouldn't care but did anyway. One morning, she came downstairs to find him fixing a loose door hinge. She offered him coffee, and when he stood to take it, he brushed against her again by accident. Maybe, but neither moved away right away. She looked up at him, and for the first time it felt like he wasn't her father's friend, wasn't a man from her past. He was just Daniel, human, gentle, close enough to make her forget where the lines were. That evening, they took the boat out onto the lake. The water was calm, and the sun painted the sky gold. Daniel rowed slowly, and Emma let her fingers trail across the surface. "You've grown into someone your dad would be proud of," he said. She smiled sadly. "You think so?" "I know so." There was something in his tone, not just admiration, but affection. It caught her off guard, and she didn't know how to respond. When they returned to shore, Daniel helped her step out of the boat. His hand held hers a second too long. She didn't pull away, and neither did he. The silence that followed said everything, that something had changed, and there was no pretending otherwise. Later that night, as she sat in her room, Emma thought about what her father would say if he knew. The thought made her chest tighten with guilt. Daniel had been like family. He had been asked to protect her, not confuse her heart. But the truth was, she didn't feel confused. She felt alive for the first time in months, maybe years, and she hated that it was him who made her feel that way. Still, when she closed her eyes that night, she didn't see her ex-boyfriend or the pain he'd left behind. She saw Daniel standing by the lake, quiet and steady, looking at her like she was someone worth waiting for. That realization scared her, not because it was wrong, but because it felt so right. The next morning, she avoided him. She worked in her room all day, trying to focus, but her thoughts kept drifting. She could still hear his voice, calm and warm, in her head. When she finally went downstairs for dinner, he greeted her with that same gentle smile, as if nothing had changed. But it had. Everything had. And she knew, deep down, that something had begun between them, something that neither of them had planned. But both felt powerless to stop. The line between right and wrong, friendship and something deeper, had started to blur, and Emma wasn't sure if she wanted to fix it or follow it wherever it led. The rain had come back that week, soft, steady, and endless. It made the lake look like glass, quiet and gray. Emma told herself she liked the peace, but inside she was restless. Ever since that night on the porch when she and Daniel had sat together in silence that felt too heavy to be just friendly, nothing had been the same. He tried to act normal, polite, and distant, but the air between them carried something unspoken. When he made breakfast, he'd set her coffee down carefully, avoiding eye contact. When she thanked him, his answer came softer than before. A small nod, a quick glance. Silence that said more than words could. Emma thought maybe it would fade if she ignored it. But it didn't. It grew in the quiet moments, in the laughter that lingered too long, in the way their conversations slowed near the end, as if neither wanted to leave the room first. One afternoon, the power went out during a storm. The house felt smaller without the hum of electricity, and the wind outside made the windows rattle. Daniel lit a few candles in the living room, and they sat near the fireplace, waiting for the lights to return. "You'd think after all these years, I'd know how to handle silence," he said with a small laugh. Emma smiled faintly. "Maybe you've just been alone too long." He looked at her, really looked, and she felt the warmth from the fire against her skin. "Maybe," he said quietly. "Or maybe I just forgot what it's like to have company that feels easy." Her heartbeat quickened. She didn't know how to answer that. Instead, she said, "I like it here with you. It feels calm." He nodded, eyes still on her. You remind me of things I'd stopped thinking about, things I thought were gone. The storm outside cracked with thunder, but inside the house, time felt still. Emma tried to laugh it off, but her voice trembled slightly. You mean like being young again? He smiled. No, I mean feeling alive. For a moment, neither moved. The only sound was the rain against the roof and the faint flicker of the fire. Then Emma stood, pretending to check the window. The storm's not slowing, she said, her voice softer now. He stood too, coming closer to her. You don't have to be nervous, he said gently. I'm not, she whispered, but she was. Not because she was afraid of him, but because she was afraid of herself. Daniel stepped back, giving her space. Your father trusts me, he said after a long pause, and I'd never want to disappoint him. She turned toward him, her eyes meeting his. You're not. You've been nothing but good to me. His voice lowered. Maybe too good? The silence between them stretched again. Emma could feel her pulse racing, her thoughts tangled. She knew he was right. They both knew it. But something about the way he looked at her, not like a child, not like a duty, but like a woman, made it impossible to think clearly. That night Emma couldn't sleep. She sat by her window, watching the rain slide down the glass. She told herself that what she felt was just loneliness, a passing moment of weakness. Daniel was kind, gentle, and familiar. Maybe that was all it was. But deep down she knew it wasn't. It was something that had been building quietly. From the first night they sat by the lake, to every shared laugh, to every silent look that lasted a second too long. The next morning, the power was still out. They had breakfast by the window, sunlight breaking through the clouds at last. Daniel handed her a cup of coffee, his hand brushing hers again. The touch was small, accidental, but it sent a spark through her. She set the cup down quickly and said, You don't have to look after me all the time. I'm fine on my own. He smiled slightly. I know, but your dad asked me to, and I keep my word. You take that too seriously, she teased. Maybe I do, he said. But it's easier than admitting that I care. The words hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. He looked like he wanted to take them back, but it was too late. Emma's breath caught. Daniel? She started, but she didn't know what to say next. He shook his head, forcing a smile. Forget it. I shouldn't have said that. But she didn't forget. That afternoon they went outside to fix the dock that had loosened in the storm. Daniel worked while she handed him tools, trying to keep things normal. Yet every time their eyes met, that same quiet tension returned. When he finally stood, wiping his hands on a towel, he looked at her and said softly, I think I'll head into town tomorrow. Maybe it's better if we both have some space. Emma nodded quickly, even though the thought of him leaving made her chest tighten. Yeah, maybe. But that night, as the sun went down, she found herself walking toward the lake again. Daniel was there, sitting on the edge of the dock, his feet just above the water. She sat beside him without a word. For a while they just listened to the sounds of the evening, the soft splash of the lake, the crickets, the fading breeze. I've been thinking, Daniel said finally. Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't feel right at all. Emma turned to him. And sometimes doing what feels right isn't. He looked at her then, and everything inside her shifted. There was no rush, no dramatic moment, just a quiet acknowledgement of something they had both been fighting. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and he didn't move away. His hand found hers, steady and warm. They stayed like that until the stars appeared. No words, no promises, just two people caught in something neither of them planned. The next day, he didn't go into town. Instead, they spent the morning fixing breakfast together, laughing again, trying to pretend nothing had happened. But they both knew pretending wouldn't erase it. Every time they passed each other in the kitchen, every small look they shared carried a quiet truth they couldn't hide anymore. That evening, Daniel stood by the window watching the sunset. Your dad called, he said. He's coming back in 2 weeks. Emma froze. Oh, he nodded slowly. It's probably good. Things will go back to normal. But she didn't want normal. She wanted the peace, the warmth, the quiet connection she found with him. She wanted the way he listened, the way he understood her without her having to explain. Still, she forced a smile. Yeah, normal sounds good. Daniel turned toward her, his eyes soft. You're a good person, Emma. Better than me. You deserve someone who isn't tied to your father's past. Don't say that, she said quickly. You've been there for me when no one else was, he sighed. That's the problem. You make it too easy to forget the rules. Her throat tightened. Then maybe the rules aren't always right. Daniel didn't answer. He just looked at her for a long moment before walking outside. Emma followed a few steps behind but stopped when she saw him by the lake. His hands in his pockets, head bowed like a man fighting himself. That night, neither of them slept. When morning came, Daniel was quiet. They had breakfast together, but the conversation felt different, slower, heavier. He didn't meet her eyes. Before leaving for town that afternoon, he finally said, I think we both need to breathe. Emma nodded, though she didn't want him to go. She wanted to ask him to stay, to say that maybe what they had wasn't wrong if it came from something honest. But she didn't. She just watched him drive away down the dirt road, the sound of his truck fading until all she could hear was the wind through the trees. Later that evening, she sat alone by the lake, the same place they'd shared so many quiet moments. The sunset looked beautiful, but it felt different now, emptier somehow. She thought about how everything had changed in such a short time. She thought about how one unexpected summer had turned her world upside down. She knew she couldn't tell anyone about what had happened, not because it was shameful, but because it was too fragile, too complicated to explain. It wasn't a story of betrayal. It was a story of two hearts finding each other in the wrong moment. And as the light faded, Emma whispered to the still water, it wasn't supposed to be this hard. The breeze carried her words away, leaving only silence. But deep down, she knew this wasn't the end, only the part where everything had changed forever. The last week of summer came too quickly. The lake house, once filled with laughter and quiet warmth, now felt heavier, as if every wall carried their unspoken secret. Emma knew her father would be home soon, and the thought made her heart ache in ways she couldn't explain. Daniel had returned from town the next day after their silent goodbye, but something between them had changed. He moved around the house differently now, careful, distant, polite. He spoke less, smiled less, and when he did look at her, it was with the kind of restraint that made her chest tighten. Emma tried to do the same. She wanted to respect the distance, to remind herself that what had grown between them couldn't continue. But no matter how hard she tried, her heart refused to listen. Every time she saw him fixing something or heard his voice calling her name, her pulse quickened. She could feel the tension beneath their calm conversations, a pull neither of them could completely hide. One evening, she found him outside, standing by the lake as the sun began to set. The sky was painted orange and gold, the water shining like glass. She hesitated, wondering if she should go back inside. But he turned and saw her. He gave her a small smile, one that carried both affection and sadness. Beautiful evening, said quietly. It is, she replied, stepping closer. You've been quiet lately. He let out a slow breath. Just trying to do the right thing. Emma looked at him for a long moment. Does it feel right? He turned to face her, his expression soft but tired. No, but it's necessary. The silence stretched between them, filled with everything they hadn't said. The gentle sound of the waves, the call of distant birds, the fading light, it all felt like a farewell that neither wanted to speak aloud. Daniel, she said finally, her voice low. When you leave, it's going to feel like none of this ever happened. And I don't know how to live with that. He looked down, his hands tightening at his sides. It did happen, he said. But that doesn't mean it can last. Emma stepped closer. Why not? Because of my dad. He met her eyes. Because of who I am in his life. Because of what I promised him. I told him I'd look after you. Not, he stopped himself before finishing the sentence. Not what? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. He shook his head. Not fall for you. The words hit her like a wave. She had known it, felt it, but hearing it out loud made her chest ache. then why does it still feel right when we're together? Daniel looked out over the lake, the sunlight glinting off his face. Because life isn't fair like that. Sometimes the people we find at the wrong time are the ones who change us the most. They stood there for a long time, saying nothing more. When the first stars appeared, Daniel finally said softly, "Your dad will be here in 3 days. I think it's best if I leave tomorrow." Emma felt her throat tighten. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." His voice broke slightly. "If I stay, I'll only make it harder for both of us." She nodded slowly, tears filling her eyes. "I don't want you to go." "I don't want to either," he admitted. "But this isn't our story to finish. It's just one we had to live for a little while." That night, she couldn't sleep. She walked quietly through the house, each step echoing in the silence. When she reached the kitchen, she saw Daniel sitting by the table, a suitcase beside him. He looked up when she entered. "You're leaving now?" she asked softly. He nodded. "I thought it'd be easier to go before morning." She stood in the doorway, trying to hold back tears. "You were supposed to watch over me," she said, her voice trembling. "And you did. But you also made me feel seen again." Daniel's eyes softened. "You did the same for me. I didn't realize how empty my life had become until you walked back into it." She took a step closer, her voice breaking. "Then why can't we just—" He stood, cutting her off gently. "Because love isn't always about holding on. Sometimes it's about knowing when to let go." Emma swallowed hard, looking up at him. "Will I ever see you again?" He gave a faint, bittersweet smile. "Maybe someday, when it won't hurt to look at you." He reached out, brushing a tear from her cheek. It was a simple touch, soft, respectful, filled with every emotion they couldn't say aloud. "Take care of yourself, Emma," he whispered. "You're stronger than you think." And with that, he picked up his bag and walked toward the door. She followed him to the porch, watching as he paused for a moment under the moonlight. He turned back one last time, their eyes meeting in the quiet darkness. Then he smiled the same gentle smile she had known since childhood, and left. The sound of his truck faded down the dirt road, leaving behind a silence that wrapped around the lake like fog. Emma stood there long after he was gone, the night air cool against her skin, her heart heavy yet strangely calm. She knew it was over. She also knew it would never truly leave her. In the days that followed, she tried to go back to normal. Her father returned, cheerful and unaware, talking about work and asking how the summer had been. Emma smiled and said it was peaceful, that Daniel had taken good care of the place. She didn't mention the nights by the lake or the moments that still replayed in her mind. Some stories were too personal to explain, too fragile to survive being spoken out loud. But every time she walked past the dock, she felt him there. His voice, his laughter, the way he had looked at her like she was someone worth understanding. She would sit there sometimes, watching the sunset, remembering how quiet the world had felt when he was beside her. Months passed. The seasons changed. Emma found work in a new city, met new people, tried to start over. But every now and then, when the rain fell softly against her window, she thought of Daniel. She wondered where he was, if he ever thought of her too, if he still carried that same quiet sadness in his eyes. Years later, received a postcard with no return address. It was a picture of a lake, not the same one, but close enough. The handwriting on the back was simple. "I hope you found peace. Thank you for reminding me what it feels like to care." Emma held the card for a long time, her eyes filling with tears. She didn't fight. She smiled faintly, whispering, "I did. And I hope you did too." She placed the postcard on her desk beside a framed photo of the old lake house. Then she looked out her window at the city skyline, feeling the soft ache of something beautiful that had ended but never truly disappeared in time. She came to understand that not every love story is meant to last forever. Some are meant to teach us something about courage, timing, or the kind of connection that changes who we are. Daniel had been that lesson for her. He had reminded her that love could be quiet, steady, and selfless even when it couldn't stay. And though their paths had parted, his presence lingered in the corners of her memory, not as regret, but as gratitude, because some people don't stay to break your heart. They stay just long enough to heal it and then go when it's time to let you live again. As the sun set outside her window, Emma whispered a final goodbye, not to erase the past, but to honor it. She knew now that what they had wasn't forbidden love. It was a moment of truth to people finding each other in the middle of loneliness and learning how to move forward after it, and somewhere far away. Maybe Daniel was watching another sunset, thinking of her too with the same quiet smile, the same bittersweet peace that only love like theirs could leave behind. Claire Mitchell never thought her life would take such an unexpected turn. Married for 5 years to Daniel, a man she loved but with whom her connection had quietly slipped into routine. Their days had become predictable work: dinner, TV, sleep. The spark she once felt was more a flicker now, faint and distant. She wondered if this was what marriage was supposed to feel like, or if she was missing something essential. When Claire enrolled in the evening literature course at the local community college, she hoped it would be a breath of fresh air, a way to rediscover herself beyond the confines of her domestic life. The class was small, and the professor, David Harper, was nothing like she expected. In his early 40s, with a calm voice and thoughtful eyes, he brought passion and warmth to each lesson. His knowledge was deep, but it was his gentle encouragement that drew Claire in, making her feel seen in ways she hadn't realized she longed for. At first, their interactions were strictly academic. Claire stayed after class sometimes to ask questions, lingering just a little longer each time. David never pushed her, but his attentive listening made her feel valued. Outside her marriage, where communication had faded, these moments became a quiet refuge. One evening, after class had ended, David asked Claire if she would stay a few minutes longer to discuss a poem they had read. She agreed, feeling a flutter of nervous excitement. They sat across from each other at the desk, the room quiet except for their voices. As he explained the layers of meaning, Claire found herself drawn not just to the poem, but to David's presence. His words felt like a mirror to her soul, reflecting emotions she had buried. Over the following weeks, Claire's visits after class became more frequent. They talked about literature, life, dreams, and disappointments. David shared stories about his own struggles, revealing vulnerability that deepened Claire's trust. She began to open up about her marriage, about feeling lost in the routine and yearning for connection. David listened without judgment, offering support that felt genuine and comforting. One night, after a particularly intense discussion about the complexity of human desire in art and poetry, Claire confessed how much she missed feeling alive. David nodded thoughtfully, saying that sometimes learning about the self required courage to explore feelings that society often labels as uncomfortable. He suggested mindfulness exercises and self-awareness, techniques to help Claire reconnect with her own emotions and desires. Claire was hesitant, but intrigued. She began practicing what David recommended: breathing exercises, paying attention to sensations, and allowing herself moments of quiet reflection. She realized how disconnected she had been, not just from her marriage, but from herself. The changes were subtle but growing. She felt more present, more in tune with what she wanted from life. Their relationship remained professional, yet the emotional undercurrent was undeniable. Claire sensed a deepening attraction but held back, aware of her marital commitment. David respected her boundaries, never pushing beyond the role of teacher and mentor. It was this respect that made their connection feel safe, even as emotions stirred. One afternoon, David invited Claire to join a small group workshop he was hosting on emotional intelligence and self-discovery. The workshop promised tools for deeper personal growth, and Claire hesitated only briefly before saying yes. She wanted to understand herself better, to find clarity. The sessions were eye-opening. Claire learned about boundaries, communication, and the importance of honoring her own feelings. Sharing with others, hearing their stories, made her realize she was not alone in her struggles. She began to see her marriage in a new light, not as a failure, but as a challenge that required honest conversation and effort. Back at home, Claire tried to share these insights with Daniel, but the conversations often felt strained or unfinished. Daniel was supportive but distant, unsure how to bridge the emotional gap. Claire felt torn between hope and frustration, wondering if love alone was enough. Meanwhile, her relationship with David continued to evolve. After each class and workshop, she found herself reflecting on what she learned. Not just about literature or emotions, but about trust and connection. David became a symbol of growth, catalyst for change in a life that had grown stagnant. One evening, after a particularly moving workshop, David offered Claire a private moment to talk. She agreed, and they sat together in the quiet room, the world outside fading away. He spoke gently about the power of self-acceptance and the courage it took to face inner fears. Claire felt tears welling up, not from sadness, but from a profound release. In that space, Claire realized that her journey was not about replacing love, but rediscovering it from within and in all her relationships. David was a guide, not a destination. Her marriage was still fragile. She now had tools to face it honestly. As the semester progressed, Claire felt a growing sense of empowerment. She still loved Daniel, but she loved herself more. The art of pleasure, she understood now, was not just physical or fleeting. It was the pleasure of being fully alive, fully present, and fully seen. And though she didn't know what the future held, Claire was no longer afraid. She had begun to write a new story, one of courage, self-discovery, and the gentle unfolding of love in unexpected places. Claire felt a new energy inside her, one that she hadn't recognized in years. The lessons from Professor David were changing her, stirring feelings that were both thrilling and confusing. After each class, when she stayed behind to talk with him, she sensed something unspoken between them, a connection that went beyond books and poetry. Yet she kept reminding herself of the boundaries she had set. She was married, after all, but something about David made her want to explore life and herself more deeply at home. Claire noticed Daniel becoming distant without explanation. Their conversations felt routine, and the warmth they once shared was fading. Claire tried to bring up her feelings, but Daniel always brushed it off, saying he was tired or stressed. The silence between them grew heavier. Claire realized that she had been living in a fog, her marriage safe but empty, her heart yearning for more. One evening, after a particularly intense class discussion on desire and human connection, David asked Claire if she wanted to join him for coffee. He said it was just to talk more about the topics they discussed in class, nothing more. Claire hesitated but agreed. Sitting across from him in the quiet cafe, she felt the air shift. Their conversation was easy, natural, but charged with emotion. David listened deeply when Claire spoke about her marriage, her loneliness, and the new feelings she was trying to understand. He didn't judge her or push. Instead, he gently encouraged her to keep exploring herself, to not be afraid of her own heart. That night, Claire lay awake thinking about David's words. For the first time in a long while, she felt hopeful. Hopeful that she could find happiness again, not by escaping her marriage, but by rediscovering her own desires and needs. As weeks passed, Claire's visits to David's office after class became a ritual. They talked about more than literature. He taught her about emotional awareness, about understanding the language of the body and mind. David showed her that pleasure was not just physical, but also emotional and intellectual. He introduced her to mindfulness exercises, helping her become more present in her own skin. Slowly, Claire began to notice small changes. She smiled more. She walked with confidence. She allowed herself to feel joy again. One afternoon, David invited Claire to join a small, private workshop he was leading on emotional intelligence and intimacy. It was a safe space, he assured her, a place to explore feelings without judgment. Claire was nervous but curious. The workshop was unlike anything she had experienced, full of honesty, vulnerability, and shared stories. She listened as others spoke about their struggles and growth, realizing how much she had kept inside. She felt a quiet strength rise within her. Meanwhile, her relationship with Daniel became even more strained. He was supportive when she tried to open up, but he couldn't meet her emotionally. Claire's heart ached with loneliness, but she didn't give up. She wanted to save what they had, but she knew she needed to be true to herself first. David remained a steady presence, a teacher and friend. After one workshop session, he offered Claire a private moment to reflect together. Sitting side by side, they talked about the power of self-love and the courage needed to face life's uncertainties. Claire felt tears welling up, not from sadness, but relief. For the first time, she felt free to be honest with herself. She realized that her journey wasn't about replacing one love with another. It was about finding her own voice and strength. David was guiding her, but the path was hers to walk. One evening, Claire came home to find Daniel asleep on the couch. She watched him for a moment, the man she loved, yet who seemed so far away. She felt a wave of compassion and sadness. She knew she had to decide what was best for both of them. Her heart was no longer full of fear, but of possibility. She was learning that pleasure and love were about connection, to herself first, then to others. The professor was teaching her not just through words, but through the quiet. Powerful changes unfolding inside her. Claire was still married, still committed, but she was beginning to live for herself again. And in that, she found a new kind of freedom. Claire's world was shifting in ways she hadn't imagined possible just a few months before. The lessons with David had awakened something inside her, a quiet confidence and a deeper understanding of herself. Though still married to Daniel, she began to see her life through new eyes. The days of numb routine were slowly being replaced by moments filled with meaning and emotion. Her conversations with Daniel remained difficult. He was kind but emotionally closed off, struggling to understand the changes Claire was going through. She tried to share her feelings openly, but it often ended in silence or awkward pauses. One evening, after a long day, Daniel admitted he felt lost too. They both recognized that something fundamental had shifted between them, and neither knew how to bridge the gap. Claire felt torn. She loved Daniel and valued their years together, but she also realized she couldn't continue pretending. The emptiness inside her demanded attention, and the lessons from David had given her the courage to face it honestly. She knew that true love required more than comfort, it needed connection, vulnerability, and growth. Meanwhile, David remained a steady, respectful presence in Claire's life. He continued teaching, guiding her through exercises that deepened her self-awareness and emotional strength. Their conversations were always thoughtful, never crossing boundaries. But Claire sensed a bond growing between them, a bond of trust and mutual respect. David helped her understand that pleasure and fulfillment were not about secrets or escape, but about embracing her own needs and feelings with kindness. One afternoon, David invited Claire to attend a weekend retreat focused on emotional healing and empowerment. Hesitant but curious, she agreed. The retreat was intense, filled with honest sharing, group exercises, and moments of quiet reflection. Claire found herself opening up about fears she hadn't voiced before. The group support and David's gentle encouragement helped her see that she was not alone in her struggles. During one session, Claire realized that her journey was not just about her marriage, but about reclaiming herself. She had spent so long putting others' needs first, Daniel's, her family's, that she had forgotten how to listen to her own heart. The retreat was a turning point. She understood that love began with self-love, and that to heal her marriage or find happiness, she had to be true to herself. Back home, Claire and Daniel sat down for a long, honest conversation. They spoke about their fears, their hopes, and the distance that had grown between them. Daniel admitted he hadn't realized how much Claire was hurting. They agreed to seek counseling together to work on rebuilding trust and emotional intimacy. Claire felt a cautious hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back. At the same time, Claire knew her connection with David was changing too. It was no longer just about learning or emotional support. It had become something deeper, a quiet friendship built on understanding and respect. She cherished their talks, the way he helped her see her own strength. But she also recognized the line they could not cross. Claire was committed to her marriage, and David honored that fully. As weeks turned into months, Claire felt more alive. She no longer feared her feelings or the uncertainty of the future. She was learning that life was complex and messy, but also full of beauty and growth. The art of pleasure she had been taught was about embracing all of herself, the light and the shadow, the joy and the pain. One evening, Daniel surprised her with a small gesture of favorite meal. A handwritten note expressing his love and his commitment to try harder. Claire smiled, touched by the effort. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a beginning. She knew the road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in years, she felt ready to walk it. Claire also knew that no matter what happened, the journey she had started with David's guidance had changed her forever. She had learned to value herself, to seek joy in everyday moments, and to face life's complexities with an open heart. Her marriage was not a story of perfect love, but a story of growth, honesty, and courage. And in that truth, Claire found a kind of peace she had never known before. The future was uncertain, but Claire was no longer afraid. She was living, learning, and loving in her own way, stronger, wiser, and more herself than ever.